This is Ben Bergson, Stefan Bertram with Philosophy of the People. And as you might be able to tell, I'm in a slightly different location. Ben, have you ever heard of Was Bappin?
I have not, no.
Was Bapping was a Twitter account that was eventually banned and was only on Substack for a while, and now it's back on Twitter because everyone can be on Twitter now.
Yeah.
But he was very ahead of his time because he was like a liberal calling for nuclear war with Russia in like 2016.
Oh, that was advanced, yeah.
He saw he was just kind of driven mad by the war in Syria and Clinton not getting her chance to blow up Assad. I just went back to his stuff now, and he's going really really mad. But he thinks Biden is like the guy. He's going to bring in the nuclear holocaust that will free everyone from not gay marriage.
Yeah. Who's the president in the dead zone?
I'm not sure.
Yeah. Oh, come on. Greg Stilson. Stilson is what I'm thinking of, yeah. Yeah, that's I'm just imagining Biden and his sunglasses and ice cream. Doing the launch codes from memory because somehow that's the only thing he still remembers at that point.
Yeah, he calls everyone that's kind of not completely like a neoliberal neocon the Axis. So Assad's in the Axis, but so is like Trump, the Republican Party, and so is Putin, and then so is like the entire Palestinian civilian population.
Which is funny because I'm pretty sure Hamas was on the other side of the Syrian civil war, in their like solidarity, right?
Yeah, famously, they got in a lot of trouble for it with Iran. Yeah. But today we're going to be talking about a different kind of edgy take.
Yes, edgy philosophy takes.
Edgy philosophy takes. With Ben using the example in last week's essay of people having really crazy takes about divine command theory.
Yeah, I mean, I wrote the essay because I kept seeing divine command ethics pop up in places that I wouldn't really expect it, like from Dave Smith, who's a libertarian comedian and podcaster who I debated a couple times back in 2019 and 2020, and I went on.
Was he an atheist then?
I'm not sure. That's an interesting question. I would have assumed that he was. Right.
You seemed was it definitely in the article you said that he had converted, or you just assumed he converted back?
Oh, he actually definitely did convert at some point. I should say probably not to Christianity because
he's weirder than that. Oh, he's Jewish.
Yeah. At any rate, he's Jewish, and and that would have been a very different vibe if he'd been like, I accepted Jesus.
Right. Yeah. Especially in the United States, where you don't have like an established church or anything. It probably just means you're a nutcase.
Yeah. I mean, it would have been. I mean, look. I mean, there are people who convert to Christianity. There are Jewish people who convert to Christianity. But if he had, that would have been. Let's just say it would have come up a lot, right? Like, especially given actually subjects that I agree with him about, right? He's been very good on, Palestine, since October 7th, for example. And in general, actually, he's always somebody who I've given credit for being, one of the few libertarians whose objections to the state actually prioritize stuff like, bombing children in the third world, rather than sort of having abstractly good positions on stuff like that, but in practice getting most hot and bothered about the top marginal tax rate. Like
speed limits.
Yeah. That's the two. Yeah, those are the two kinds of libertarians that either like what really gets you going, or like is like the capital gains tax rate, or what really gets you going is yes, these speed limits, licensing requirements, you know, regulations against raw milk. Let's be honest, age of consent, you know, stuff like that, right? Like that's those are the yeah. There's overlap, right? But I think those are two different libertarian personality types. But you know, but Dave is actually in the honorable category of somebody who has terrible views on like economic questions. And you know, generally right-wing inclinations about lots of other stuff. To be clear, right? I probably disagree with about like 97% of everything, but who not only has like very good foreign policy views, but actually, you know, but actually like puts a lot of emphasis on them, right? So back in 2019, 2020, I did two debates with him about sort of core capitalism, socialism, economics, you know, redistribution of wealth kind of stuff. And I also went on a show to do one with the first one was Gene Epstein, that's like now long since lost behind a paywall. And um, and yeah, went on one other time talk about his books, and you know, so it's like yeah, it started pretty contentious, but I generally like the guy. I think he's just wrong about a lot of stuff, but you know, but I certainly like him in his role of guy who goes on, you know, Piers Morgan and whatnot to, you know, to argue about Israel Palestine. But yeah, I saw, I saw this clip from his show, Part of the Problem, where he said something like, I don't have it in front of me, but it was something like the uh, yeah, it was something like back when I was an atheist, I thought it was ridiculous when, you know, believers would say, you know, how can you have morality? You know, how can you make sense of morality without God? And you know, but now that actually seems right to me. That you know, I don't understand how, you know, something like, you know, if it's all just, you know, if we all just, you know, evolved from single cell organisms and there's no guiding hand behind all of it, how is it that there are objective moral truths?
And he has to very quickly clarify that for his libertarian audience.
Yeah, exactly. Nice. Mercutio says, having read Capital Chapter 5 in today's topic of extreme takes does remind me of being at Rhodes. I did the most beautiful Bigly leap anybody's ever seen. Yeah, that's at the end of Capital Chapter 5. Marx quotes this Latin phrase, hic Rhodus, hic salta, which I had to look up as here is Rhodes, take your leap, which is apparently from Aesop's Fables. That the fable of the boasting traveler who said when he was at Rhodes, he took the most amazing leap that anybody's ever done, and he can call witnesses to attest that he did this. And somebody essentially tells him, it's like, oh, I mean, look, if you really did this, we don't need to bring in witnesses. Like, just do it again, right? You know, that's the this is your Rhodes. You know, take your leap. It was huge, folks. People said I was a genius for such a physical leap that I was given a diploma to become the world's first Rhodes Scholar. Yeah. So yes, of course, because he made this comment on his show, this irritated a section of his fan base, because of course so many libertarians are adamant atheists, which is why, I mean, I don't know if he started believing in God before I talked to him the first time in 2019, but I would have assumed that he was an atheist, right? Just from my experience with, you know, libertarians like him. And so many libertarians are adamant atheists, and also, in fact, big philosophy nerds that that of course saying something like this, you know, caused some backlash on Twitter. You know, by the way, you know, I think it's like obnoxious and bad to call human beings things they don't want to be called, but I'm going to dead name Twitter until the end of time. I'm
Yeah,
not
I'm gonna dead name Turkey too. It's
going
a
to call.
Euro, it's a Euros championship, and all the commentators are calling Turkey Turkey Air, whatever their official name is now, trying
Oh,
to make
that's funny.
trying
Yeah,
to force the world to use their like native pronunciation. It's like fuck off.
yeah. I'm just going to say Turkey. The yeah. Yeah, the website is Twitter. The streaming service is HBO Max. I refuse to adjust any of these things, but anyway, on Twitter, there was some backlash on this, and people saying, "Oh, he's saying you can't have morality without God, right? It's like you can't be a good person without God." And he clarified, and this is fair enough as far as it goes, right? This sort of standard move that people saying stuff like this make. It's like, no. I'm not saying uh, you can't be, you can't act morally without believing in God. I'm saying you can't make sense of the idea of objective moral truth
Mm.
without bringing God, into it. Um, and that might have been the thing where he said the thing about the one cell organisms or whatever. And okay, I'm sorry. I'm just going to pause here. What's going on with the?
I'm inflating my crown, Ben.
Why do you have an inflatable crown?
I found on. I just entered this room minutes before we went live. I just found it up on the thing.
All right, fair enough. My questions have been answered.
It seems
Uh,
like if there's a golden crown sat like directly above your laptop and you go on stream, then that's kind of like a sign from not God to put it on.
Fair enough. Uh, yeah. Um, yeah. I mean, so I think so. That was one example, is the Dave Smith example,
But
and
that's kind of wild that he ended up at that position, but not that wild. Of that's kind of like quite a standard divine command theory as well.
it's pretty standard divine command ethics stuff. I mean, this is not fundamentally different from like what like, oh god, let me think, who's well, certainly like Douglas Wilson, who's a megachurch pastor who used to do debates with Christopher Hitchens. I did a YouTube debate with him a couple of years ago, and it's like very similar to what he said to me. Or it's like oh god, what's his name? Larry. Can't believe I'm blanking on this right now. Larry Taunton, right? Is is another is another person like this, who really loves, who really loves this kind of argument. And a lot of them say like broadly similar things, right? It's sort of, Dave Smith is a surprising person to say it, right? But like it's a relatively standard thing for like a certain kind of intense, somewhat conservative religious person to say, who's like, maybe enough of an intellectual that they don't quite say, anybody who's not who doesn't believe in God is just gonna, rape and pillage all the time, right? So then, but then another example that I'd seen that same week was from this guy Drago Dimitrov, who his Twitter bio says, among other things, that he's a tech creator and a chess expert. So take that what you will. But I saw this tweet going around that where it's a very, very long tweet. If you're willing to pay Elon Musk your using Twitter appreciation fee, you're allowed to just go on forever and ever. And honestly, I think it kind of destroys a lot of what's distinctive about the medium. But
Yeah, I also feel like this guy's specific sentiments could be kept in a few characters.
yeah, he definitely could have been pithier about this, right? But I'm just gonna read off the whole email here, right? He says many atheists are confused about divine command theory. Everything that is good is so because God declared it as such. That's the essence of DCT. Here's the formula for 99% of atheist objections to DCT. Step one, choose an action that you intuitively find morally repulsive right now. Step two, propose a hypothetical universe where God says this morally repulsive action is, quote, good, unquote. Step three, pound your fist on the table and insist that the violation of your current moral intuition is proof that the hypothetical is absurd, and consequently, that God declaring something good is insufficient for establishing that thing as being ontologically good. Um, Given the narcissism that atheism indirectly promotes, i.e., no one is above me, it is understandable why divine command theory is a hard pill to swallow for some. So then, are you ready for the assumption that so many critics miss? This part is in bold, which I didn't even know you can do on Twitter. Let there be light. There is a all caps big difference between when you or I say something and when God says something. When you or I say something, we simply share an idea. We transfer information. Sound waves vibrate. A gust of wind passes. When God speaks, it shapes the fundamental composition of reality itself. The cosmic order, capital C, capital O, gets rearranged. The flow of relationships between all created things gets redirected. There's a cascading butterfly effect that reverberates throughout the entire universe. This means the atheist critic fails to utilize sufficient imagination in their proposed hypothetical. Step two. For example, let's say that in that hypothetical universe, God were to declare that killing puppies is a good, beautiful thing. Once executed, that metaphysical declaration would spill into your moral conscience and reshape your intuitions, as well as any other aspect of the created order that is related to this puppy killing act, such that italicized and the not is in all caps, the version of you that lives in that hypothetical universe would not find this action problematic, despite the fact that the version of you reading this post right now does. The version of you in this universe with your current set of moral intuitions is different than the version of you that would exist in the hypothetical universe, which would be grounded in an alternative set of moral intuitions. God declaring something good, a causative act, would change your fundamental perceptions of what good is, the effect of this act. By virtue of being created in the image of God, you would be changed. Given the notion of humans coming from God, a change within the nature of God would necessarily result, oh, we're so close to being done. It is change within the nature of humanity. When God speaks, stuff happens. I encourage you to think more robustly and humbly about your hypotheticals and remember that you are not God. And then my favorite part, and the part that, inspired the aspect of the essay that the title of the stream comes from, is there's a little Chad Yes meme where the stick figure on the left says, so you believe that drowning a puppy becomes good if God tells you to do it? Chad says, yes.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of violation of scripture in that thing. I know I say this quite a lot, and it doesn't really matter, but there's obviously many parts in the Bible where God says something should come to be, and then it doesn't. And obviously, those people end up in trouble or whatever. But it doesn't, like, what he's saying there is, like, if God says drowning puppies is bad, that then rewires everyone's intuitions such that that is the case in their mind. But that's obviously not what happens in the Bible.
Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting point because in the Bible, God definitely can reach in to, alter people's emotions, and sometimes does, right? He
But
hardens
generally,
hair.
he doesn't want to, right? He wants you to do it of your own accord, otherwise, you're unworthy.
Yeah, exactly, right.
You shouldn't have to get up his ass and do that. You should do it yourself.
Yeah, exactly.
God
So,
saves those who help themselves.
in fact, the most famous example, I think, of God biblically reaching into somebody's mind and, rewiring their emotions is not towards doing something good. It's God hardening Pharaoh's heart,
Mm.
to, I guess, increase the challenge for the Israelites or something. I'm not really sure why he does that. But yeah, it's, make sure that the exact plan plays out. But yeah, generally speaking, God biblically seems very uninterested in getting people to do, in getting people to follow the path that he wants them to go on. Right. I mean, he'll sort of send a prophet down to yell at you for not doing it.
Right, if you're
Right?
very lucky, he will tell you what to do.
Yeah. But that's the best case.
Almost no one gets that. But if you're very lucky, you'll get that. And if not, then yeah, it's just up to you. Like it's the complete reverse of what he's saying here. It doesn't
Yeah,
really matter, but
no. It's like the least important thing that's wrong with this, but it is kind of funny, and even beyond the biblical point, it's generally a little strange to think that if God decided that he approved of murdering puppies, that everybody's moral intuitions would be rewired, because surely Dimitrov believes that
like I really actually believe that homosexual sex is fine. Like intuitionally, it doesn't bother me in the slightest. But
yeah,
presumably,
right.
it bothers Dimitrov.
Yeah, exactly, right? So it's like, yeah, presumably he thinks that in the actual timeline that we live in, A, God exists and has willed a certain, set of things to be morally right and wrong. But B, human beings like have moral disagreements with one another all the time, right? I mean that this is very, very common for people to sort of not have moral intuitions that point them in the direction of the things that Drago Dimitrov presumably believes that God wants, right? Like, yeah, that's the homosexuality example is perfect, right? And there are lots of things like this. Again, people have uh, moral disagreement in the actual world is very common. So it doesn't seem to be the case that in the actual case, right? Uh, the universe that we live in, that God has decided to reach into everybody's brain and rewire their moral reactions to get
I
them
guess
to.
this forces us to conclude that we live in a world where there's no God.
Yeah, right, exactly, right. Yeah, very confusing. So I don't know why he thinks that in the puppy murdering hypothetical, the divinely sanctioned puppy murder hypothetical, that in that world, I don't know why he assumes that the divine brainwashing would happen to get everybody to agree that drowning puppies was right and good and beautiful. But again, that's confusing, but it's also not not the biggest problem with this, right? Like that the biggest problem is that he is going from, in this universe everybody would agree that it was fine, to, in this universe it would in fact be fine, which is quite a leap, right? And in fact, it's exactly the kind of leap that I mean, like, this is what he's assuming is relativism, right? I mean, this is the uh, I mean, it's God relativism instead of culture relativism, but it's very clearly relativism, because this is like the sort of standard difference between being a moral relativist and not, is whether you think that everybody in a given time and place thinking that something is fine is exculpatory, right? Or is or at least is enough to show, like, whether or not they're excused for not knowing it, right? Like, is enough to show that in fact they were all correct, right? That, like, it's impossible for everybody to be wrong. um and so, in fact, as I was thinking about this, it occurred to me that Dimitrov's example is essentially the you know the God version of a secularized example given by William Lane Craig, who's somebody who Dimitrov, presumably agrees with about, all this stuff. But Craig is using essentially the same example to prove exactly the opposite point, right? So many years ago, Craig did a debate with the philosopher Shelley Kagan, on whether you can have objective morality without God. And early in that debate, the there's a Craig uses this example to demonstrate the absurdity of denying objective morality. It's like, okay, we can't have objective morality without God, and that's step one. Step two, it would be totally absurd to deny that objective reality exists. And to demonstrate step two, that it would be absurd to deny objective morality, Craig says, this is a quote,
He raises one moral proposition and then he raises another.
to say that there are objective moral values, to say that something is good or evil independently of what anybody believes it to be. So to say, for example, that the Holocaust was objectively evil is to say it was evil even though the Nazis who carried it out thought it was good, and it would still be evil even if the Nazis had won World War II and succeeded in brainwashing or exterminating everyone who disagreed with them. So everyone believed the Holocaust was good. And what really strikes me about that is like, look, that's just a secularized version of Kagan's puppy killing example, right? That like, it's that the Nazis are using a different mechanism, right? They aren't reaching directly into your brain to rewire your moral intuitions. They're either using more standard methods of brainwashing, indoctrination, or they're killing everybody they couldn't indoctrinate or whatever. But like, the sum total effect is the same, right? That no one in the Nazis the Nazis win the war universe has believes that the Holocaust was morally wrong. And I think Craig is, I think he's wrong to think that you need God to make sense of objective moral truths. In fact, I think that's kind of vice versa, right? I think that, I think that divine command ethics ends up being a sort of straight, ultimately a form of relativism, which which I think the Dimitrov stuff brings out nicely, right? But it's like, look, if if Craig is right that the Holocaust would still be wrong in a universe where no one thought it was wrong, right? Then Dimitrov is wrong to think that God deciding that he sanctioned drowning puppies would make drowning puppies fine if while he were at it God decided to divinely brainwash everybody into thinking it was fine, right? Because I mean the sort of core issue here is about moral realism. And is moral realism true? If so, what kind of moral realism is true? Is there a sense in which we can split the difference? All of these are really interesting open issues. I'm not claiming to say anything interesting about here. But but I think what all this like brings out so nicely is it's like, look, you don't add anything to the case for moral realism if you add the premise God exists. That doesn't strengthen that case at all. And you don't add anything to the case against moral realism if you add the premise God does not exist, right? That's also that's also just completely irrelevant. That you
Like
you
the
have
conjugation of the two proposals is useful. Like if we say objective morality exists and God exists, then God will probably know well, he will certainly know if there are
sure,
objective moral rules, he knows them. And so he can probably tell them about them to us. But yeah, you're right that, by themselves, the propositions don't reinforce each other.
Yeah, the propositions, right. So, yeah, the propositions don't reinforce each other. If both of them are true, that's like maybe good luck for us in terms of moral epistemology, because, as you say, God will certainly know which things are morally good, and he may choose to share that knowledge with us, and then we'll know too, right? you know, um, but that has nothing to do with what makes things good, which is actually the position that I think a lot of your better theists, um, end up arriving at, right? That okay, the sort of basic Euthyphro move is pretty decisive as far as like the logical independence of these subjects, but sure, God, God, being all good wants people to do the right things, and God being all knowing, has, knows what all the right things to do are. Then I guess you can raise a question about why God hasn't, done a better job of informing us. But, that's just the problem of evil, right? Like that's, that there's nothing, special about this, this instance of it. But yeah, I
It's
mean,
funny, like compared to my favorite Chad Yes example of the galaxy is what is a our galaxy's wet.
yes,
Chad Yes is that God could make galaxies wet
totally. Yeah.
some way. Like that's it seems weird to us, but it's definitely not logically impossible.
Yeah.
Uh,
It doesn't seem on its face to be logically incoherent in any way
I
that
guess if you put enough water in galaxies, that at some point they become wet, right? If you just keep putting
yeah,
water in.
presumably, right? Yeah, I mean, I guess you could have like an entire galaxy filled with water or something. I don't know exactly, but yeah, that's like it. It's not obviously logically incoherent to say that galaxies could be wet. It's not absurd in that sense, right? It just seems like, the absurd thing is saying that any actually existing galaxies we know about are wet.
Yeah, it seems to contradict due to empirical facts rather than anything
Yeah,
more than that. But this kind of divine command theory, your example seems actually a lot worse than that.
yeah, it does. Because I mean, again, the sort of fundamental problem here. There's a video that I link from philosophy professor in Georgia, Nathan Nobis, who which I think like nails the core issue very nicely, which is to say, like, uh, to why is God to which is to say, look, does God, like, if God commands something, does God have a reason to command that thing, or is it just, arbitrary, right? That this just happens to be what God whims. Because if it's arbitrary, then God could just as easily have whimmed the reverse, right? I mean, that this is just sort of God is flipping a celestial coin and deciding, okay, don't drown puppies, but he could have just as easily been do drown puppies. And that's really what gets you the Euthyphro problem, the sort of absurdity of saying that hypothetically it would be good to drown puppies if God, the celestial coin flip it come up the other way. But if God does have a reason, then why isn't whatever that reason is a reason for us to not drown puppies, regardless of whether or not there's a God, right? Like that's the sort of basic Euthyphro dilemma, right? I think phrased a little bit differently, but very helpfully. Um, and and to really bring it to the baseness question, I think that, like, yeah, this thing. This is maybe my least favorite thing about the way that people argue about philosophy on social media, especially Twitter. Um, is this, like, I don't know? Yeah, I don't know. I've seen like utilitarians on Twitter. You know,
Like, take that bitch's organs.
Yeah, exactly, right? It's like, yes, that's so based. You should in fact embrace, killing the healthy patient to harvest his organs, right? Um, and it's the same, yeah. It's like, oh, so you're saying if God, decided that it was good to drown puppies, would be good to drown puppies? It's like, yeah, but you could, but again, why couldn't the cultural relativist, to go to Craig's example, could just do the Chad Yes meme for if so the Holocaust would be good if the Nazis had killed everybody who thought it was bad? Yes. Right? Like, and this,
I mean, I think a lot of people on Twitter just think the Holocaust is good. So,
yeah, yeah, they,
but
they
also it didn't
actually,
happen. So,
yeah, there probably are a lot of people on Twitter who think the Holocaust is good. I was actually just the other day, I have no excuse for this. This is so obviously a horrible way to spend my time. But the other day, I was actually arguing with one of the it didn't happen people on Twitter, because they were on Katie Halper's post and uh, and a I think it's one of those things where I'll give into the temptation that I normally wouldn't, because it's like it's so obviously a waste of everybody's time to talk to these people.
Right,
But
because
it's
they live in a completely different epistemic world to you, right?
yeah, right. Right, exactly. Right. It's like it's gonna go nowhere. But I think
Like
they
if you say to them, like, well, why did the number of Jews in the world go from
yeah.
this number to
Yeah,
this
it's like
number
18 million
in
to
two?
12 million. Yeah.
Yeah, they'd be like, well, it didn't. And you'd be like, well, okay.
Yeah, exactly. So I think it's the thing where it's like, yeah, it's so obviously a bad idea. I normally wouldn't do it, but sometimes people who I would normally know better than to argue with about things, when they make a incredibly specific claim, it's like, and I happen to notice, it's like, no, come on, that's wrong. Like, what are you talking about, right? So they had so Katie had been like arguing with them before, and she was like, come on, guys, the Germans kept notes, and they're like, oh, nowhere in these notes does it say it, blah blah blah. There's no evidence.
Right, because they're like, Hitler never signed an order which said, kill them all.
Yeah. Yeah, a bunch of people who were like one rung in the operational hierarchy below Hitler, had the final solution meeting where they kept minutes, and it came very close to just saying kill them all. But yeah, that's and so it's like I gave it to temptation and started rattling off. It's like, well, um, there are Allied aerial photos that you can see like the chimneys in. There's reams and reams of testimony from the summer commandos who like worked the gas chambers. There were like mass shipments of gold teeth fillings. There were decades of God knows how many people walking around with numbers tattooed on their arms. And it I mean, I think he like picked one or two of these things to like say no, it's not true, and then he called me
Yeah, often with these people, you shouldn't give them a list.
yeah, because then they can just pick, right?
Yeah,
That's like
yeah. You should just
yes.
give them one thing. But then,
So
yeah, I mean, it's pointless generally, but like,
yeah, I mean, yeah, no, it's the yeah, he picked like one thing off the list. He thought he could just like say no, that's not, and then he called me a lying Jew, and that was pretty much the end of the conversation. I was like, okay, I see what I did here. This is my this is my bad. Oh, moving on. But yes, I'm sure.
I saw a good Nick Land tweet today, uh, where like someone had posted a thing about how actually all the Nazis were Jews, and then someone replied being like, none of the people in this picture are Jews, and half of them aren't even Nazis. And then Nick Land was like, classic Talmudic pedantry.
Oh,
But it's funny,
yeah.
I've mentioned it before, but Nick Land spends a lot of his time arguing with anti Semites. Because obviously, everyone that's a fan of him is an anti Semite, while he's only kind of like moderately anti Semite. So he's like, guys, like, they're not that big of a deal.
uh, yeah, that's the uh Enshea says the Nazis in I guess my chat, if the Nazis had won, modern Germans look back at it the way Americans look back at the Native American genocide tragedy, but a bit of an abstraction. Yeah, eventually, once enough time has passed that for like I think initially you have to be like, oh, that was good, and then and then eventually be like, I guess that was bad, but you're not that excited about it. Um, yeah, so I think that a lot of uh yeah, so putting aside the actual Nazis, which are there's probably not a single case of where it's more reassuring to remember that Twitter is not real life, and these people are wildly overrepresented, right? But yes, putting aside the actual the Holocaust was good and or never happened crowd, I think most of us would sort of see what was wrong with the Holocaust would have been good if the Nazis had killed or brainwashed everybody who disagreed. But yeah, and I also think maybe that example is like just distasteful enough to see the problem with
Yeah, I
the
mean, you can keep going, right? Because then you can say, well, if then later, like a century later, now
uh,
liberalized Germans went into the archives and found evidence of the Holocaust and they decided it was bad again, would it then just
yeah,
switch back again? Like,
yeah.
it's this idea, it just seems so strange, right?
Yeah, right, totally. And also, of course, and you could do the same thing with divine command ethics, right? I mean, God could change his mind; he could change it again. And if you say, "Oh, God wouldn't change his mind," then say, "Well, why not?" Right? And I suspect it's going to be very hard to say why not without some sort of overt or covert appeal to moral intuition. That like that would be a bad thing to do. Um, and uh, you see it. Oh, Furby.
So, someone in your chat, so I can't reply to them directly, was asking if this is from Burger King. But I just looked at it now. There's no evidence it's from Burger King. I think
Yeah,
it's a Christmas hat.
does Burger King do inflatable ones? I think they.
No, they do cardboard crowns, I'm pretty sure.
Yeah, that seems right. Um, yeah, and I think that like in a way, I think this is downstream of a much more general problem with arguing about anything on Twitter, which is that the medium rewards certain things because even though now you can you can pay a few bucks a month and you could like put all of Mein Kampf in your post the
Yeah,
for
I mean, it's kind of crazy. Like, it's as if on Reddit, the more kind of negative attention your post got, then you literally got money sent to your bank account. And that's so obviously going to create like a negative, toxic environment.
yeah, right. uh,
Like, each time someone tells you to kill yourself, you earn $1.
oh my god, can you even I do and don't want to watch a documentary that's set in the world where they set up the rules that way um, but but yeah, right, it's like so now you can do that, right? But during the years when the sort of rules were set, you had this very tight you know 280 or at one point 140 character limit. uh this is the uh, this is the old Peter Thiel line about how the disappointments of technological modernity. We were promised 5 flying cars. We got 140 characters, which is a little bit funny when you remember that he made his biggest money from PayPal. So it's like, yeah, you're not doing anything to get us the flying cars, buddy. But
Yeah, you made a bank, which is bad.
yeah, yeah, you came up with a scheme for skimming tiny amounts of money off of like bank transactions. Like that's your contribution to the modern world. But
But yeah, we shouldn't complain because since these character limits have been removed, as you suggest, like Twitter's become much worse.
oh no, it's totally gotten worse, right? But the specific, but back when they they were in place, that meant that it's like, look, there are only a certain number of things you could do with this as a medium, right? Because like you could do like 100 tweet threads where you said something complicated. People did do that, but like that's kind of not what the medium was set up for, and it's not really
And
what
they
it
were just
was.
impossible to read.
Yeah, it's a very hard way to read that much text.
Like, people made a whole website called like Tweet Thread Reader or whatever, which was just a separate site which put them all into a fucking plain text document.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, it's not what it's set up for. It was kind of a pain in the ass to read. There's a reason most people didn't do that. So you're not going to do that. So what can you do, right? It's like, well, you can share articles, but if you're going to do like discourse, you're gonna talk about politics, you're gonna talk about philosophy, you're gonna talk about ideas, then there are really a very, very limited number of ways you can do that in 280 characters. And the things that the things that it really rewards are the things that are the best done in that character limit, which are snark and bullet biting, right? I mean, that's the those are the things that like are the sort of best suited to doing in like a super concise form, right? That's like, so either a sort of quick drive-by snarky attempt to find inconsistency. Oh, I'll bet you guys would totally say the same thing if it were such and such, right?
I've changed all the conditions. Would you think about it the same way?
Yeah, right. There's a lot of that. That yeah. So it's just the sort of like, yeah, the quick hit pointing out inconsistency, oftentimes in a in that like very snarky tone that it rewards. There's like just sort of saying something by like, you don't have time to argue for it, or really like think through exactly what's wrong with what your opponent's saying, so you can just sort of like
I mean, it's one of those things people often get confused in where they ask philosophy, where they're like, does this argument have a fallacy in it? Or they just say, does this statement have a fallacy in it?
yeah,
And then you have to say, well, fallacies are a property of arguments, and what you have here is just is a lying statement. And with kind of up until now, the Twitter character limit, you often can't fit in like your premise and your conclusion and whatever. You kind of just have to go with like the statement.
totally. Yeah. I mean, this was an issue all the time when I started doing the debunk segment on the Michael Brooks show, and my first book came out, which had all this stuff about logical fallacies in it. And, people would constantly ask me, it's like, oh, what's the logical fallacy here? Or is there some logical fallacy here? It's like they're quoting like a sentence, right? It's like, that's not how logical fallacies work, right? You have as you say, it's a property of arguments. You need to get the whole argument. And yeah, people do sometimes, I have to say, I have started to see in the last year or two, more people who will put entire like philosophical arguments in tweets, but it always really makes me wince when I see it, because there's no way to do that without making it so stripped down and simplistic that it's like, this would have been so much better to just say the conclusion without pretending that you had an argument for it, because like the like the jump from the premise to the conclusion is always like, essentially the premise has to be the conclusion already in slightly different words, right? Or like,
You know,
spread out into two premises, but like it's obviously just a way of rephrasing the conclusion.
the ground warrants conclusion method of argument analysis by Toomlin?
No.
In that, he splits premises basically into grounds and warrants, where grounds are like kind of the basic facts, and the warrants are like the rules of inference, which get you from one to the other. And yeah, certainly in tweets, if you manage to fit in a premise and a conclusion, you're not going to have the backing or the rules of inference also in there. It either has to be like implicit, and if it's implicit, then it's either going to be so obvious that, as you say, like you might as well have just written the conclusion,
Yeah, exactly.
or it's going to be disputable, and the fact that you haven't written it means that everyone will just go, well, what about this?
Yeah, no, I think that's absolutely right. I mean, yeah, because like it's always like, yeah, because it's like most of the ones I see, you know, where, where there is like an obvious inference from the premise to the conclusion. Um, Again, nobody ever would accept both of the premises without already accepting the conclusion. Nobody ever just didn't realize that conclusion followed from those premises. It's always just like a weird, arrogant way of like rephrasing the conclusion, but spread out into two premises, like
Yeah,
the
and then acting as if it's like subjectively invariantly convincing, and that if you don't agree with it, you're an idiot.
yeah. Right. So it's like, this is not a specific example I've seen, but just like, the tweet format I'm thinking of, like a pro divine command theory version of it would be like, you know, either objective morality can be understood naturalistically or divine command theory is true. Premise two, divine morality cannot be understood naturalistically. Conclusion, divine command theory is true. It'd be like, yeah, okay, but like, again, how is this better than just saying divine command theory is true, right? I mean, it's like, what are you adding to the conversation by putting it this way? It's really, I don't know. I mean, it's sort of I don't know. It's
Yeah,
sort of,
because two basically reads most contemporary ethical work is certainly false.
yeah, right, exactly. It's like, yeah, it's like that's what's doing all the heavy lifting. It's like, yeah, okay, but like everybody who disagrees with the conclusion will obviously disagree with this premise. So like, I don't understand what we're doing here. It's like almost like in a weird way. It's almost like,
Right, the only person it appeals to is some kind of like moral nihilist, but they're going to be like, "Well, I'm still a moral nihilist. Fuck off."
yeah. Yeah, I mean, it's just I don't know. Like, it almost feels like an insult to the sort of like to the value of like explicitly stating arguments at all, right? Because it's like such a caricature of the point of it. So yeah, like usually, so that's like I've got to say, maybe I just wasn't seeing it, but that feels like a relatively recent development to me. I wasn't seeing anybody doing these like premise one, premise two conclusion tweets in like 2019. Um, I've only seen them really in the last couple of years. So classically, people wouldn't try to do this because they'd sort of correctly see that like there's no way to spell out a whole persuasive argument in 280 characters, right? Like that doesn't work. So they would, yeah. So instead, you just like, sarcastically summarize what your opponent thinks, right? Like maybe just in case anybody doesn't get that you're being sarcastic, you do the thing where you capitalize random letters, right? It's like, okay, in
You
case.
do star in a gay voice star their tweet.
Exactly. So, like, yeah. So, yeah, it's like that's, there can be objective morality without God. And then, you just capitalize one out of every three, letters
Mhm.
in it to show that it's dumb, right? Like you can do that. You can do the drive-by attempt to find inconsistency, um, or you can, or you can do the, yes, I do think that, right? Because it's like, that's like, oh, all right. Uh, that's what gets you the Chad Yesin, which is, I've got to say, it's like, I don't know. I mean, this is like a really obvious point and one that feels sort of, lame and I don't know what, but like, yeah, if you're trying to get social credit by your bold willingness to say things that are obviously implausible, that's going to pull in the opposite direction from actually figuring out what's true. Right? like that's these two things are going to
Yeah,
be
that's how you end up hanging
yeah,
out with
way.
prison abolitionists.
Yes, totally. Yeah. It's like, yeah, oh my God. Yeah. I remember, I mean, it didn't even have the excuse of being a tweet. It was like a New York Times op-ed or something, right? It's like, but I remember from 2020, an article is called, yes, we literally mean abolish prisons, right? It's like, yeah, that's like some Chad Yesin stuff that, you're getting, you're getting the social credit for like boldly taking the obviously crazy position. Um, and then you're not even doing like the thing, like, you're not even doing like the like Zizekian thing where you say something that sounds kind of crazy, and then like in the next sentence you say by which I mean, and then like you lay out right the like the way that if you think about it, this is actually true.
Man, have you seen Zizek's Substack lately?
I don't think I've actually read a full post lately. I've because I get it like emailed to my inbox, but I only like actually like click and read like one every four or something. What's he been saying lately?
He recently wrote an article where he was like, "What we need for progress is for the U.S. military to intervene like everywhere in the world." By which I mean, the U.S. military needs to intervene everywhere in the world.
Oh wow, there wasn't even a
But if there was, I didn't see it. I mean, he was going from the point of it would be better for the U.S. Army to occupy Gaza than Israel, which is true, but from a position of just such abject low standards. to then basically universalize that is the U.S. military is kind of the agent of progress, which is kind of amazingly just directly 20 years ago neocon kind of stuff.
Yeah, that's what I was just thinking. It's Hitchensian, late Hitchensian. Yeah, it's which is funny because apparently because somebody who was at the New School at the time who took classes from both of them told me when I was writing the book that he tried to set up a Hitchens Zizek debate on the war in Iraq, and then the schedules didn't quite work out, and Hitchens got sick and whatever. Which is like I really wanted to see that. It made me really sad when I found out that it almost happened. So yeah, if that's correct, then Slavo would be coming around to the other side of that. But I mean, sometimes it's like I will say, right?
I think he has been driven. I think he has been driven quite mad by the Ukraine thing, like lots of people have, and it has made things worse for him. Well, he's always been like a bit sus on issues like this. I think he has become actually worse.
Yeah, I mean, I'm obviously a massive Zizek apologist, but he did say a little while ago that like the U.S. should give Ukraine nukes, which it's like
I think he probably went back to that one in this article.
there's a there's a part which obviously uh, I I mean it is actually true that there's like a pretty good case that Ukraine should have kept their nukes like 30 years ago, right? But
I mean, they wouldn't have had the money to keep them up, but yeah, in like a world where somehow
a
they could
world where
keep them free.
they could work out the money, right? Then
Yeah.
like that would have been better, right? Because then the war wouldn't have happened in the first place. But the idea that they should be like affirmatively given nukes in the middle of a war with a nuclear power, I'm it's like okay, that's a bit much. I I think I think that they should that should not be yeah I think that I think that like I think there's like a reacting against sort of like idiots on the left who say things that are actually pro Putin that I can understand, and then there's like saying we should start World War III, which all I could say is I don't think we should do that.
Yeah,
But
in this article, he does do the thing of like, it's a paradox that, US superpower decline is a bad thing. But it's kind of a bit lame where he is just saying, like, the US should invade Gaza and uses the literal phrase, the US should raise the war in Ukraine to a higher level, which seems like the least thing we should do.
yeah, I think it's been raised. I think it's feels like it's raised to a slightly higher level at every other week, and we're Zeno's paradox in our way to Armageddon right now. And even if we never quite get there, the progression still makes me nervous, and I would prefer that we stopped.
We need to call up Zizek and be like, the US needs to preemptively invade Lebanon.
Yeah. Uh, yeah. So, yeah, I mean, I think it's yes. I like Zizek, but yes, he has bad takes on Ukraine, no doubt about it. But yeah, uh, it just so it's like yeah, it's one thing if you're doing like, but like the more typical Zizekian thing is when you say something that's like sort of like bafflingly paradoxical, and then you say like, and then in the next paragraph you like cash it out and you show like, oh, here's how this could actually be true. And actually, it makes sense if we break it down this way, right? Like this sort of classic example is like Zizek saying that Gandhi was more violent than Hitler, right?
Yeah.
That if you're interpreting that as Gandhi had a higher kill count than Hitler, that's obviously not true, right? But it's then he's got this whole view about violence in the Zizekian sense is like trying to like radically, remake the world, around your will, and actually, because the Nazi project was ultimately to retrench the status quo and preserve it, whereas Gandhi is actually ending this deeply entrenched system of British colonialism in India. So in that sense, Gandhi is more, is a more violent rupture, from the way things had been than Hitler, right? So that's like the classic, that's like the classic version of that move, right? But then like the Twitter version would be, yeah, I literally mean Gandhi killed more people than Hitler, right? It's like, well, I guess that gets you some attention, and people who for some reason like it will high five each other, but like
By not sufficiently supporting British imperialism in World War II, Gandhi literally caused the Holocaust.
there you go, right? That
Otherwise, they could have just put 10 million Indians in Belgium in 1939 and just won the war.
yeah, there you go, there you go. I like it.
That's why we use the British Empire at all times.
Yeah. So yeah, I mean, this is, and it just seems like, yeah, I don't know if you it's a very simple point, but it seems like if you're interested in philosophy because you're curious about what's true, then you should, try to gravitate towards premises that seem like they might be accurate, which is exactly the opposite of the Chad Yes style of philosophical inquiry, where they're like, yeah, I literally do believe that you should cut up healthy patients to harvest their organs to save the lives of the five sick ones. It's like, I do think that if God told you to drown your puppy, that would be a morally admirable thing to do, right? And yeah, I think that's I grew up at a different time when it was much more acceptable to use concise words to describe developmental disabilities. So I'm struggling to find a different way of expressing myself here, but that's very stupid, right? And you shouldn't do that.
Demonstrates you're a highly regarded individual.
Yes, there we go.
I see this week you've controversially came out in favour of evolution, then.
That's right. I'm taking my own advice and not taking the epic based stances. Yeah. So Compact Magazine published a essay by David Moulton called "Two Cheers for Intelligent Design."
It's just such a ridiculously dismal idea that you're not even brave enough to be like to come out and actually support it. You're like, but I don't support it, but it was a good idea, which is like a position that no one has ever held ever.
Yeah.
No one's been like, okay, I don't actually believe intelligent design is good, but like his arguments are so well made.
Yeah, it's a weird article because, yeah, you're right. It's like I can understand three cheers for it. Like I just agree with intelligent design, but why two cheers? That's an interesting question. But yeah, he doesn't quite come out and say that like intelligent design is correct. He never quite fully endorses the position, and he also never quite says that I can tell. Yes, they should have taught the debate in public schools, but he strongly suggests that like actually the intelligent design guys had like important challenging arguments, and it should have been taken more seriously, and people were too dismissive of this and all of that, which is kind of the way the article starts, is me noting that when I was writing the book about Christopher Hitchens, I'd kind of operated under the assumption that the version of the culture war that gave us new atheism was dead and gone and not coming back. And this last week, the universe seems to be bound and determined to prove me wrong about that, because
We're
we
gonna have
got
to do some early 2000s cringe to beat them back.
yeah, we got Louisiana this week announced that the 10 Commandments have to be displayed in every public school classroom, from preschool to public colleges. Um, and I assume the courts are going to stop them pretty quickly, because this seems like so unconstitutional. You almost have to like admire the like boldness of it, But then yeah, that was on Wednesday, and on Tuesday, Compact put out this article trying to ambiguously rehabilitate intelligent design, and thought, it's like, I've never really written about evolution on the Substack before. And if you're going to have a philosophy Substack where you can write about, non-political subjects or non-entirely political subjects, uh, you know, this is kind of what it's for, right? It's like, yeah, let's take advantage of that and actually dig into this, because it does seem to me that, in fact, look, Moulton is not wrong, that there were plenty of people who didn't really understand the issues, who just kind of sneered at the you know theocratic backwardness of this stuff. But also, a lot of people did understand the issues, and they had they had really convincing arguments against it. And in fact, all of the intelligent design stuff is sort of thinly dressed up God of the Gap shit, and it's actually
Yeah, I mean, it was really dismal, just kind of being like, yeah, but what about this weird thing that happened in natural history,
yeah, 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 exactly. So
which would have been totally different 50 years in the past and 50 years in the future. Like you would come up with a different list of weird natural history facts.
yeah, exactly. You have to keep readjusting. Like, yeah, you can stick God in the gaps if you want to, but then you have to keep readjusting as the position of the gaps changes.
So
So
that's probably what we'll do next week. But what are you going to write this week in case we end up doing that?
yeah, that is probably what we're gonna talk about next week. Stay a week behind. I'm not 100% sure about this week, because I think probably the next two things I'm going to write, I'm not sure about the order of them, are something about that is also about capital, and it's particularly objection to something David Carvey says, and on the dumb side. But I've had this idea for so long, I really want to do it at some point. I have a article I really want to write called "Why G.A. Cohen Would Have Hated Venmo."
Neat. I retrieved the goblet from the Eldrith space behind me because people in chat were demanding it.
Fair enough. All
I think that's all for us this week.
right, sounds good.
Let me find the outro button.